Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
And by airs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at airs.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Become a global player in your field.
Cross Culture to Go provides virtual support for your global business and career success.
We can help you thrive in 140 plus countries and markets.
On the web at crossculturetogo.com.
This is Ed in San Diego, and you're on a special edition of Global TV Talk Show. And with us today is Mark Colo, who's a co-founder with findneurohelp.org, a wonderful organization giving help to people who are afflicted with neural disease like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And he's going to tell us more about ALS as well. Dave Levine, welcome from Minneapolis. Dave is a major co-sponsor of this particular program. Dave, why don't you very quickly introduce yourself?
I'm based in Minnesota, as Ed said. I've been in the workplace-based employee support space for my whole career. I'm an MSW, social worker by training. I know the clinical side, the operational side, as well as the customer side of crisis response, counseling, and wellness programs.
Okay, we're going to talk about that and the role of EAP, if there's some similarity or symbiotic relationship, so our corporate audience will understand exactly what this is. Rob Pianka is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Has been on our programs a few times, heavily involved in global talent, global thinking. Welcome. Why don't you do a little bit better job introducing yourself than I just did?
Thank you for welcoming us all, Edwin. If I was on Saban's staff at Alabama, I would be part of the physical training staff, and I would focus on block and tackle with regard to cultural competence. Nothing high flying, just the basic, how do you meet a stranger and not blow that first 5 minutes?
Good. That we're going to do a deep dive on that. Particularly, well, look what we're doing here. This is a teleconference. And the idea of a teleconference has been around since probably 1920 when Sarnoff created TV. But here we are today, and it saved my business and actually created a reinvention and a pathway towards potential wellness for me. So, Stephen Howard, a lot has gone on between you and I the past year. We've done several shows. Your brainchild was Strive and Thrive XL. So very quickly for the audience, why don't you reiterate what that's about?
Well, thanks, Ed. And Strive XL is our show. We have leaders get involved in a discussion about how to strive, how to be better leaders, how to create better teams, leading remotely, and even just improve themselves. And the Thrive XL is our show where we focus on wellness, workplace wellness, leadership wellness, what leaders can do to help their employees, with the Delta variant, as well as the return to the workplace situations. And the XL simply stands for living extra large. And that's what we want people to do, lead extra large and live extra large. So thanks.
Okay, now you're a consultant, Caliente Leadership. You're also a book publisher, consultant. and you've authored 21 books on business leadership. So managers, some of us have heard this already or saw the article. Some senior manager in a Fortune 500 company was just quoted 2-3 days ago say, "Hey, I don't get it. I'm managing empty desks. I don't know where my people are. I don't know what to do." So, Stephen, how do you turn that guy into a better manager?
Well, first of all, I would tell him to take off his manager hat and put on a leadership hat. You don't manage people anymore. I don't know anybody who goes to workplaces. I can't wait to be managed today. You have to lead people. When you lead people, you coach them, you mentor them, and it's a total different mindset. Look, there are times you have to be a manager, and when you're a manager, you're giving directions and directives. It's not like, we have to do this. One of the phrases I love is that you manage things, you manage policies, you manage procedures, but you lead people. And so he's got to start thinking about how does he lead those empty chairs, not how does he manage them.
So Rob Pianka, when you're coaching, you are leading, right? You're not managing.
Yeah, I mean, if you're telling people what to think and giving them the answers to questions, you're doing a disservice. It's like planting annuals. You got to ask questions and back off so that you're just helping them, think something through. And they're kind of like active listening. It's not your job to give your opinion. It's your job to help the person sort it out for themselves. And that's not leadership from out in front. I don't think it would be leadership from behind. I mean,
cool. Yeah, Dave Levine, what do you think?
Just prior to this call, I was on with a guy I've known for years. He's based in Czech Republic, now Czechia. He manages 20,000. He's in charge of HR for 20,000 employees in 35 countries in EMEA. And he's got 14 reports. It's this US-based large multinational. And he himself has 14 reports, none of whom he's met in person. And that's going on. Yeah. He hasn't been to his office in downtown Prague in a year. And so he may have, you may have led with that example as opposed to the guy you'd mentioned with how does he manage empty chairs. I think that the leadership that Steve offered is you're not leading. It really does. You're not managing anymore. You're leading, and it really requires people to step up in their communication skills and listening skills, and rely less on the structure and the hierarchy and more on personal interactions and relationships.
So, Mark, you guys in findneurohelp.org, which is our favorite charity, and that's why I keep pushing it. But so Joanne's mother had a severe case of Alzheimer's, and we saw it coming, and unfortunately, it's running in the family. Well, I'll be back to you about that later personally. And my dad, when in the last couple of years, he died when he was 86. He didn't know who I was, had no idea. So it was strange. So, Mark, how do you counsel people who, like yourself, have Parkinson's?
That's a great question. That'd probably take me a little bit more than a few minutes to answer that one.
I'm sorry, you have 31 seconds.
Okay. Well,
I'm joking.
First of all, our service model that we created has 6 different areas that we focus on. The number one area that we begin with is mental health and wellness. And to get a diagnosis of any one of those chronic neuro diseases is big news. I mean, when you hear it, you're like, what? Did I just dream that, or did it really happen? And the mind can play some games on you. It can tell you that either the future is positive and favorable, or it can get pessimistic and say, there's no hope here. So what we try and do first and foremost is let the individual know that, hey, they've got a long life ahead of them still. They've got time on their side, and they can get to a place of stability and good health mentally, and feeling good, happy about the future without having to dwell on what's happened at the time, staying fixed and worried on the present. So.
Why don't you talk about the board that you have, Scott and the other guys that you've introduced me to?
We have 5 members of our board. Our executive director is Scott Scoville, and he did his whole career working as a district attorney in a forensic medicine unit. So he's the one that would take the DNA and figure out if the guy was a criminal or not. He very bright guy. And
that was in Orange County.
In Orange County. And then we have another gentleman who's his name is Brent Rose, and Brent is actually an attorney for the IRS. So he helps us get through all the tax loopholes and the tax part of it. So we're thankful to have. We're all very diverse and different. Alex is a former marketing person, and Jim Cook is our most recent board member, and he's a previous Ironman. I wouldn't say champion, but he told me that Ironman they have in Kona, Hawaii. He's finished in the top 10 several times.
Wow.
So he knows Mark Allen, he knows Dave Scott, he knows all the big heavy hitters in that realm. So he's fun to have on our committee. And he also runs golf, bike tournaments, riding tournaments, where he gets these cyclists that go ride 200 miles. It's called a Devil Century. And he's got a whole batch of those guys that support him in his cycling events.
Fascinating stuff, Mark. Mark, the golf tournament is a fundraiser and bringing people together with doctors and just, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to be there, but another time. So how many people you got coming?
We've got about 60 people. Now we had the highest attendance we had is 80. We have this goal that we want to break 100, so it won't be this year, but hopefully be next year. So, but it's the people we have are good people. They're all high-profile individuals that can afford to take a Monday off and not be harmed financially. I had a call yesterday from a gentleman named Wes Chamberlain. He's a professional baseball player, and I think he's on the Phillies or something. I think it might be the Phillies, but he wanted to come play. He's asking me all the details about it. He had a bunch of friends that were former athletes. So I don't know if he'll make it either, but he wants to come. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I hope you're going to have somebody holding up the phone and taking some video.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So we'll show clips of that.
Okay.
I'll get my tech partner, Paul, to help organize some of that if you want.
Okay. I've got a clip from previous tournaments you might want to look at too.
Yeah, good. All right, so let's talk about Delta variant. I have tried to set up a couple of live meetings, and man, I got slammed. I'm finding that people don't want to, although they will go to some meetings, they didn't want to go to mine in San Diego. And so we're doing this. And we have another one on October 1, which is called Beat VUCA. And that's really going to be an exciting time. So we're going to hold off on doing our own live meetings, or they'll be hybrid. In other words, we'll have this part of the live meeting too. But and so I'm actually a little nervous about even going to the supermarket. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated, but I was in the market yesterday, and like probably half the people walking around the supermarket, it's a big place, and upscale, we're wearing masks. And I said, should I put mine on? I have it in my back pocket, but I said, no, I feel fine. And so, I mean, people are scared, and it's impacting them. So, Dave, it goes to you, wellness guy here. What's your advice? What do you see?
Yeah, it's just a number of things, but I was at a conference last week, my first since last March 2020. my first business trip, my first conference. And this was One Mind. You might be familiar with One Mind Foundation or One Mind at Work. Garen Staglin is the founder of that, and it's been a very active, only around 5 years, but very active. And they do great conferences. They've got great members. Harvey Schwartz, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, led it off. And you don't think of a finance guy, a Wall Street guy like that leading off a mental health conference, but very good conference. And they set it up where this year the speakers and organizers were required to be vaccinated to be present, and the participants were virtual. And they had a couple hundred participants. It was a good format for this. So that's one response. There's ways to continue business like this. And the silver lining is this Delta variant has definitely scared folks, and in a good way. I personally had little tolerance for these anti-vaxxers, but that I have to grow that, because you, as Steve again pointed out earlier, you got to be good listeners. You can't just discount folks if the goal we all want is only accomplished through a more united communicative dialogue. So although that's my bias, I've been trying to be open. And the silver lining is the fear, which doesn't motivate folks long-term. The fear has motivated folks short-term. So we're seeing an increase in vaccination rates. There will be a hardcore that just refuses, but I think I have no problem with the government mandates and the OSHA efforts that Biden has taken in the U.S. It's fascinating to look outside the U.S., where most of my focus is these days, and see countries like New Zealand or Japan or Vietnam who have had very low infection rates, but have been really hit with, and did not invest very quickly in vaccinations, or can't afford vaccinations, and then have been hit hard with this Delta variant and are playing catch-up ball. Huge populations, like in Africa, 1.2 billion people on the continent, 55 countries. Just Nigeria alone, 220 million people, 1% vaccination rate in Nigeria with that concentration of people. So we've got to be dialoguing, we've got to be sharing. And another silver lining is that it is definitely, people are CEOs of large employers, leaders of large states, large governmental agencies, are getting that people are hit with mental health issues here and require adjustments in all sorts of ways. It may be depression, anxiety, it may be parenting, it may be sharing responsibility at home because you can't go into the office and your kids are struggling with school and virtual learning and all of those kinds of, they're getting that depression and anxiety, addiction are front door issues that's going to impact their business. So no longer are they insisting on what's the productivity, what's the impact on productivity, or what's the impact on my healthcare costs. They're saying, how are we attacking depression? How are we helping our folks make these adjustments to the stressors they're facing?
Well, I'm going to bring in Stephen Howard because he's got a real tie line into the thinking in big companies. But as I mentioned, and I know this is live TV here, but being a caregiver for Joanne the past 10 days or so, it's impacted my mental health because I got other work to do. And it's impacted our relationship to some extent, irritation or shortness or not seeing things clearly or not overreacting or not explaining, blah, 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 So it's, I just can't imagine having a bunch of kids running around the house and having work and having issues and I mean, keeping your act together. I almost said the S word, but so Stephen, what's your take on this? And how should people think about this? How do you get a breath of fresh air and a sense of sanity?
Yeah, no, it is troubling, Ed, and it's fortunately more and more people are talking about it. I happen to lead a committee. There's a event going on, a virtual event in November 8th to 10th, called the Global Workplace Wellness Summit. And I'm leading a committee on leadership and engagement and well-being. And we're talking about these issues on a weekly basis on the committee. And we're going to present some ideas at the summit of organizations this has to be front and center. I mean, it's as important and maybe even short-term more important than diversity and inclusion right now, because it's impacting everybody. I see statistics, anywhere from 43% to 60% of the U.S. workforce has some mental wellness issues, whether that's depression or anxiety or stress or whatever it happens to be. And, unhealthy workers are not going to be productive workers. And, we used to look at unhealthy workers in terms of sickness, physical ailments, mental, I don't want to call it illness, but mental unwellness, let's call it, because mental illness has kind of a negative connotation, but mental unwellness is impacting workplace productivity. People are burnt out, and leaders have to learn to identify what are the early signs of burnout. And this is going to become a leadership skill going forward.
Dave?
It is in leadership. And I think at the same time, many organizations' revenues have been down. It's a tough time to make further investments, but a lot of folks are feeling like you have felt, Ed, and thanks for being so candid about the own stressors at home. Leaders are finding ways to make more of their existing benefits, their wellness programs, their coaching, their online platforms, their EAPs, to leverage those and focus those more in ways that they haven't before. It's sort of shifting some of that burden to EAPs. Was on a call a couple of weeks ago with Greg DeLapp, the CEO of EAP, Employee Assistance Practitioners Association. Global organization, sort of captures most people in the EAP field. They offer certification for CEAP, certification for familiarity with workplace counseling, but between 30 and 100% increase in participation in their programs. And typically these are capitated programs. So the burden is sort of shifting to these providers to provide double the care in some cases, double the amount of sessions for the same capitated rate. But they're figuring out something. They're after the win-win to attack the depression and stress and anxiety and other relationship issues. And the true leaders are making things happen. One other response to that is crises are obvious, and we're in a crisis now. Crises like a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, active shooter, bank robberies. These hit front page news or CNN, and we're reading about them. Everybody's aware of this crisis going on, and it's easier for a CEO to step up and invest and help their employees respond to it. The majority of crises happen, are not front page news, are very low visibility, but are equally devastating to the handful of people that are impacted by a snowmobile accident, a drowning, unexpected death of a family member, of a coworker, or the coworker themselves. And COVID is sort of someplace in the middle. It's definitely high visibility, but had you not shared the situation that you shared at home, we would not be aware of the stressors you're facing. And many are like that. And the real leaders are stepping up to, that cliche about doing something good when nobody's looking. It's not doing something good when the natural disaster, the hurricane or tornado impacts your business. when everybody's watching to see how you're going to respond. The BP accident and that infamous statement where the CEO at the time of BP publicly said he was looking forward to getting his life back and not sort of whitewashing the impact that the oil spill was having on the climate. The real leaders are stepping up and doing something when nobody's looking, without the fanfare around it, without the publicity, without the expectation of the public for him or her to do something.
Mark Colo.
Yeah.
Wow.
I hear all these comments and I agree with all of them. Very, very good comments. The one comment that kind of stuck with me a little bit was just how tough it is for these families when they have these health issues and how to make ends meet, for example. I mean, an individual with a chronic illness typically spends 25% more on healthcare, and ailments that are unrelated to the disease, but that are brought on by the disease. So for example, Parkinson's, you never die from Parkinson's. I've had that for 15 years now. You die from something that's associated, but not part of. It's something else with the function in the body that gets hammered for a period of time and then breaks down. 1 in every 4 people in their lives will face some sort of depression, and some will face major depression, which should be a very big issue for them to handle. So I was, just as my own example, I was 48 years old. I was at the peak of my career, and my little pinky started twitching on me. I thought, well, what the heck is that? And so I went to see the doctor, and he looked at it. And he says, wow, he says, you might want to go see a neurologist. So I waited 3 months, went to go see the neurologist. And then he says to me, Mark, he says, he did a few tests, first of all, and I didn't know what he was doing. I thought it was totally irrelevant for my being there. But he did them anyways. And then he said, Mark, would you have a seat? And I'm glad he said that, because had he not said that, I would have fallen to my seat. And he says, I got to tell you, I think I'm not happy to tell you, but I think your symptoms are Parkinsonian. And I just sunk. I left the hospital that day feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And I was 48 years old. I had a wife to support. I had 3 children under the age of 10. And I don't know if you would feel a little bit uptight if you got that diagnosis and you had that circumstance, but it kind of shocked my world. I mean, it was a big, big deal. So I'm a champion of management and leadership, stepping out of the box and helping individuals in a creative way and doing it equitably across the board. But just doing something is the beginning. Taking a first step is what needs to happen. So anyway, I didn't mean to divert here. So
are you kidding? That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's change the subject a little bit, Rob, Pianka. Since we last talked, which is about a month ago, I think, what's different in your business world? Anything? You were on, if I just, for the audience, you were on a show with some of the others about doing something to be a global voice for some kind of change, whether it's sustainability or whatever.
But it goes back to when COVID first occurred as an incident in China, and then became a regional problem in China, and they were locking down cities, and then became an epidemic in Asia, and then a pandemic. My thinking was, along with everybody else, that we're getting touched on the shoulder by the angel of death. I mean, everybody on the planet is tapped on the shoulder, and I know you guys been busy, but hey, it's a lethal virus, and it's going to go pandemic. One of there's always a silver lining, even in this. I was thinking, well, it's a good test case for watching global cultures and how every culture in the world reacts to this. So I've spent a lot of my time looking at how different countries and different cultures in different countries have reacted to this. And what's occurring to me lately and becoming more and more apparent to me is that and a lot through talking with my son, who's 30 years old and looks at climate change as something that means I have no future. So what are you talking about, Mr. Career Counselor? There's a website that follows the day in the year, in the calendar year, when the human race begins to use more resources available to them than are renewable by the planet. And it's now shifting in towards 5 months. We go through 7 months of the year, and then we're eating the seed corn. And so we have a major, planetary ecological disaster that nobody can hide from. And then COVID comes around and taps us all and says, I'm pandemic, I'm invisible, but I'm pandemic. And so many of the reactions that I see in different global cultures are good or bad, depending on whether or not the reaction rises up to the universal collective nature of the threat. I mean, you can cover yourself and then not care. And I think a lot of people have it's an ethical disaster for a lot of people, because we're not able to take care of people. And the scope of who we need to take care of is planetary. So it's a major challenge, and we're not generally equipped to meet it. And so I think there's a level of just redefining what the moral obligation each of us feels, right? And there's a certain sadness to that, because we can't really meet our moral obligation in this case. It's unless we work all together, right? And you don't see that. You don't see that in all the programming. You don't see that in the reactions. And outside of just being scared, which depresses people, and being disrupted, and then having social tie and social context canceled, right? It's also a challenge that we're not really meeting well. And for me, that's becoming more apparent, that there is no returning to normal, and anybody who thinks there is, like half the world does, right, hasn't met hasn't really faced this thing, in the eyes, right? We have got to find something new and different, on the other side of this. And it's going to require a lot of, and we talked about that in the other discussions, what is better management now? What do employees expect? What's your culture of your company supposed to be? How is that culture of the company supposed to connect to the world? I think it matters a lot now. And so maybe if we face the problem, we could come up with really good answers. I mean, and people would love to participate in their companies, because the company is part of the solution. I don't know. It's that you asked me what I was thinking about lately.
Yeah, I want to introduce Mirela, but Stephen, why don't you jump in?
I'd like to add to that, because boy, Rob, you just sparked a thought, and I never thought that organizations might be able to help. But so here's my thought. This is a personal opinion, obviously. I don't think since probably the John Kennedy administration, so it's not political, it goes across both parties. I don't think the best and the brightest have gone to serve in government as a general rule since the 1960s. I think the best and the brightest today go to Silicon Valley, they go to Wall Street, various other places, entrepreneurs. Maybe if organizations would hire the best and brightest, but then put them like on a 2-year sabbatical to go work in an administration. Because I personally think that one of the problems that, and I look at this from a leadership standpoint, I don't think we've had government leaders across the United States, pretty much even across the world, who were in a position to handle this pandemic, who had the intellectual fortitude, who had knowledge of what really happened with the flu in the early 1900s and what have you. So I also been thinking about this and seen it as a leadership issue. And it's just unfortunate that as societies around the world, our best and brightest are not going into government leadership.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a timely announcement.
Hi, I'm Sergei Gorbatov.
I'm Angela Lane.
Together we're researchers, writers and practitioners in the field of human resources.
And we've also been multi-country, multi-assignment career expats.
We owe our professional development and growth to a very large extent to the international assignment opportunities that we have had.
But in a world where distributed work may become the norm, we also want to understand what will happen to the nature, duration, and purpose of international assignments.
Together with our colleague, Julian Dalzell from the University of South Carolina, we're undertaking a study on the future of expatriation.
And we'd value your contribution. You can participate in this important study by completing a simple 10-minute questionnaire.
Access the questionnaire by typing in your browser tinyurl.com/expert study. That's tinyurl.com/expert study. You can also find the link here on Ed's website next to this video.
Thank you for joining us in this study. In return for your contribution, we'll provide you with a copy of our research.
And of course, you'll be invited to an exclusive webinar hosted by Ed, where we will share our findings right here on Global Business News.
And so please go to tinyurl.com/expat study. Take the survey so that we can better understand the future of expatriation.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
So briefly, what we have witnessed here, not just in this country, but Hungary and Belarus, and certainly in China and Russia, amongst other places, is that the leadership has become brittle and more forceful at the same time to seek control rather than be do-gooders. Anyway, welcome, Mirela. I'm grateful that you're able to join this white guys club here. But
happy to add some color and flavor. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, so we met a couple of years ago when I did some meetings in Canada, and then you've been on a talk show series with me. Thank you. And I know you just did CERC in Toronto, and maybe you can share some insight about us. What we've been talking about is like guys talk, but it didn't start out that way. whole concept for this particular show was to bring a variety of leaders in their own ways, leaders to talk about how we're reacting to the Delta variant. And it's an outgrowth of a previous show we did about a month or two ago called Becoming a Global Voice for Change in Your Own Way. And we had several people talk about that. So Mirela, you're now with Zynga and you're in charge of mobility. Is your shop open or is it all virtual?
Well, we are virtual. We're starting to rethink and slowly open a number of our offices across the world. I think we took some initial steps to open our London office. And it's been an interesting thing that there's people that are, happy and anxious to get back to the office, and there's others that are hesitating. So from a corporate perspective, we're definitely not putting any pressure on any of our employees to return to the office. I'd say for the most part, we're closed in an office environment until January of next year, but just really starting to explore, the possibility of moving back into, an office environment sooner if possible. What we've done, which is really interesting because, the work from home arrangement was not a policed provision within Zynga prior to the pandemic. And so the last 18 months has definitely challenged us to take a closer look at our multitude of roles. And of course, we work a lot in technology, a lot can be done remotely. But because of the creative nature of the work that our teams do, there's also a good argument to be made about really some roles being more effective and more appropriate to be in that office space, collaborating with peers face-to-face, side-by-side. So we've been doing a lot of due diligence around creating a flexible work environment and really understanding which roles can be done completely remotely, which roles must be done in the office, and in which circumstances can we do a hybrid of the two. And when you asked me or mentioned that I participated in this CRC in this past week, this was definitely a hot topic, really learning and understanding how companies have evolved their workplace flexibility programs. What are they thinking? What are they going to be doing in terms of allowing their employees to work remote, and also addressing some larger organizations who have global footprint in hundreds of countries are able to make really bold statements around you can work from anywhere. And that is because they have a registered business entity in just about every country in the world. So these are the things that I think many of us at the corporate level have been thinking about, definitely from an HR perspective. How do we foster the flexibility that has been in place for the last 18 months that we've learned that can be really successful in our environment? And how do we make those arrangements work in the future, offering flexibility where needed, but at the same time recognizing that some roles may be very key and very unique that must be performed in an office environment because of the nature of the tasks to be performed. The other thing that's come up in just my own thoughts, but also in discussions with some other colleagues and peers, is thinking about, well, if we can't get everybody, in an office, organizing groups that perhaps maybe are in the same geographical location or a part of the world to make the remote work a little bit more productive and more successful, that, we don't have somebody always dialing in at midnight when the rest of their team may be sitting somewhere else in the world at noon. And so, a little bit of thought in terms of structuring businesses in groups and delivery teams so that perhaps maybe they might be in a geographical location somewhere in the world that fosters just better opportunity to work remotely and not really burn out our staff with the expectation is that they're online during their time zones at 8 o'clock in the morning and also joining colleagues in a different time zone, 12, 13 hours later.
Yeah, so I have interesting experiences. I was invited to be on a panel at my 3 a.m. but because it was like in Dubai and it was already, the next afternoon. But I did it and it was worth it. But I'm reluctant to do that again. Yeah.
It's a one-time thing, right? You could do that once in a while, but definitely, we're all experiencing a lot of on-the-job burnout. balancing and managing and really not having those defined lines to say, okay, it's quitting time. I'm getting in my car and driving home or taking the commuter train. And so I think we're forced to actually create some boundaries of our own, because no one's going to be there to say, look, you've been online for 13 hours. It's time to quit for the day.
Yeah,
so
I know. Yeah.
I promise not to invite you to anything at 3 o'clock in the morning.
So as a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm staging an Asian program, and it's going to start at my 5 p.m. California time. And in Australia, and Taiwan, and Philippines, it's already the next afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm willing to do that. 5 o'clock here is nothing. So anyway, you got to meet these people. Stephen Howard and I have known each other more than a year. We've done about 30 shows together. And he's an author of 21 books on turning managers into leaders. And you have experience with different, very large companies in Toronto. And now you're doing this global thing with Zynga. What is Zynga?
So Zynga is, I think we're probably ranked number 3 in the world, or closely moving up in ranks in terms of a company that develops online games. So some of you might be familiar with Star Wars games, with Words with Friends. I mean, I'm not a gamer, so I have to admit, do not quiz me on all of our games, but we make online video games. And I think we have strived as an organization in the last 18 months. Obviously, more people are at home, they have more time. The games are fantastic. There's great talent, as I think Steve was talking about, or I think it was Steve that mentioned, the intellectual levels out of the Silicon Valleys and out of, the financial industries on Wall Street. They're extremely bright minds, and I'm constantly impressed by what they've accomplished from a professional perspective, being literally a couple of years out of university, how smart they are, how bright, how creative they are. So what they're doing is they're making these amazing video games that the world is playing. And, Zynga is one of those companies that during the pandemic has definitely excelled. I would say our mobility and immigration program has been extremely busy, more so than I would have ever expected in terms of finding the best and the brightest talent around the world and onboarding them. And those talented individuals also seeking opportunity at this time to actually make some career changes. And I know that as I was participating in the conference this week as well, there were a number of folks that made a reference as to the fact that many have reevaluated their lives, definitely reevaluated their careers. And although in those initial, 5-6 months, things were a little slow in terms of companies onboarding new staff members and pursuing all of their recruitment efforts, and many putting job requisitions on hold, shortly after that initial, 5-6 months of hesitation, the world opened up again, and a lot of individuals, especially the brightest talent that have very unique skills that are highly demanded, have been able to make some strategic career shifts and moves in the last 12 or so months. So that has been keeping me really, really busy in terms of a lot of domestic US movement, as well as international, surprisingly. Like, we've been dealing obviously with the challenges of getting people across the borders with different countries imposing different travel restrictions and bans, but definitely we've been able to build really strong business cases to still continue to move key talent around the world. It's taken a little longer than normal, but we've been able to do it, as many companies have. So I don't know if, gentlemen, you have access to this, but a lot of my global mobility leader peers have said that their programs have really not seen a drastic decrease at all from previous years. So more complexity, more discussion, a lot more processing, and a lot more patience required, but we are all still moving and shifting people around the world.
Isn't it strange that in the age of virtual, you just don't leave people where they are and still employ them?
Absolutely, right. And that just brings up another discussion to think as to whether or not, immigration authorities and governments at some point, as they focus on reopening fully their economy and addressing, local unemployment rates, whether or not they want to put the brakes on in terms of allowing foreign workers to come into the country. I think initially many in the global mobility space were even concerned about, am I going to have a career or a job doing what I do in a couple of years if, this whole movement of people is going to stop. But the truth is, we're moving very unique talent around the world, whether it's here at Zynga or in my past role at running the global mobility program for John Hancock Manulife in Canada and globally. The truth is we're not just moving everybody. We're moving very unique talent skills that often are strategic contributors in the organization, definitely more of a senior manager to C-suite level type of an employee. Obviously some technical skilled individuals with very unique talents as well, but we're not importing waiters and waitresses, right? Although I understand that they're in short supply right now too, because a lot of people are just not willing to do that work and feel a little bit threatened in terms of their health and their well-being in that environment. So, that being said, I don't think that we're going to stop seeing global mobility. I think people are going to continue to move. Companies are going to recognize that talent isn't sitting in your backyard.
Thank you.
Ed,
all right, Dave. Dave, yeah.
If I may, just a context that others on this call.
Let me do the intro. Dave Levine, for many years, was in a very, very large insurance company, employee assistance. Okay.
Just thanks. Just a context for Mirela's introduction to Zynga. Yeah, it's a strange sounding name, foreign to my ears, I think. And I hear gaming, and I think, well, that's cute. For others that needed this adjustment that I received recently, video gaming and online gaming, and Zynga is a leader in that. The revenues produced by that industry are greater than all movies globally and North American sports combined. This is enormous. So when Mirela comments on the activity and the migration of talent across international boundaries and getting the best and brightest, they're following the money too, because it becomes so popular, and in a relatively short time. 10 years or so. I mean, we were familiar with Madden's, maybe on this call, with Madden's NFL sports games, but which has been around for a while. But the real spike in this activity and related revenues has happened only in the last 5 or 10 years. And it's enormous. I needed that adjustment. I had no idea that it's bigger than Hollywood and the NFL and the Major League Baseball combined.
Well, Dave, thanks for that. I actually didn't know that. And so I kind of almost feel obliged to give you a trivia tidbit of information in terms of the Zynga name, because it is, my understanding, it's the name of one of the founders' dogs. So a lot of people ask me, like, what does Zynga stand for? So, which makes this organization definitely pet friendly. I actually joined last June, so I've not even had an opportunity to step one foot into any of Zynga's studios around the world, not even locally in Toronto. But apparently when the offices reopen, I think we can bring our dogs. So I still have some time to make sure my dog becomes better behaved, because he likes to bark at everything that moves. But nevertheless, great for sharing some trivia around video gaming in this industry. But Dave, I had no idea that the combined revenues are that great. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, Rob.
But it's interesting for me because I'm looking at 5,000 cultures across the planet and how they deal with this, and that goes from currently indigenous, to super. The people that work in the tech laboratories of the major companies that already know where the tech is going 100 years from now and all that type of stuff. It's the human race is spread out across the whole spectrum of time, and when it comes to first world people like ourselves sitting here, it's the line that COVID has pushed us across, that accelerated the push across, is quite interesting. Because if you were born before, say, 1960 or 1970, or raised by somebody who was, right, your framework for looking at the world is the post-World War II world, right? The electronic architecture that's out there already to support a completely different way of life and a completely different type of economy, that there is no shortage of supply and demand in an electronic digital economy as you have in commodities or anything else. I mean, people can make a good living making graphics that are, hey, I'm sorry, it's digital. It doesn't even exist, but now it exists. The service economy, the digital economy really exists. And we were living in this world of the past, a mashup of a past world that has our comfort zone. We're very familiar with it. And this future, which was already here. And if you had an industrial job in the Midwest in America, you know what that means. It was already here 20 years ago and you didn't have a job, right? So it's a fine line and it's a tough one. But now we've been pushed to the other side of it. I mean, can you imagine what would have happened if we had had the pandemic in 1965 or 70 before the internet made it possible to have remote work? You couldn't go to work. This would have been a global depression that unlike any ever seen. And we would have been, eventually coming out of our houses scavenging for food because we couldn't get to work or work with each other. So we were saved by the fact that we had created this digital architecture already. And I'm thinking that, we're disoriented and we need to find our new comfort zone, but it's definitely going further in this direction. I mean, if you've ever commuted in the Washington, D.C. area, the whole idea of remote work is a godsend. I remember 20 years ago, somebody said to me, if Chinese people want to get the level of car ownership that America has, and this is before Uber or everything else, right? If they want to have the same number of cars per family that we do, there's not enough iron.
Yeah.
Right. So, back to the comment about, we can't sit too heavy on the planet. And the remote work is fantastic. Why not? I fully embrace it. Is that optimistic?
No, not at all. I mean, Rob, some of us have been working remotely for a long time, but yeah, and I think for a better part of the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to do that because my career started out in management consulting, working at PwC here in Toronto. And I remember I was probably one of the first people in human resources that was given the flexibility of working remote. That was really common in the field because our management consultants who supported external clients were often not in the office or maybe twice a year for a group meeting. So over the last 20 years, I've had that benefit and that flexibility. I think what shifted for me when somebody told me that I can't go to the office at all. And that just created a different dynamic in my own head. And I used to look forward to it, whatever frequency was appropriate, whether it was because there were in-person meetings or I just needed to get out of the suburbs and get into the city and, spend a better part of the day actually not being at all productive, but reconnecting with colleagues and peers in the office and maybe taking a walk in downtown Toronto for lunch and having a lunch with the vendor. I would say, it's been a little rough in the last, 6 months that still is not available as an occasional option. So I think a lot of people are embracing this, but I think it's also a lot easier for individuals like myself or you gentlemen. And I think we're of a different age group where you mentioned you have 30-year-old children, mine's 19, but we don't have little ones at home. And it's really amazing to see the transition shift in my experience that when I first started working from home 20 years ago, and I would get on a global conference call, I was the only one at home. I would be panicked that, God forbid, my dog barked during the call and it be heard by my colleagues, that it would disturb the meeting and people would be, totally offended. And then fast forward about 10 years later, when, I moved to IBM, through the acquisition of the management consulting group out of PwC. And I had a global role, and this concept of working remote was starting to take a little bit more flight in HR. And now I would have colleagues who I could hear babies crying in the background, a lot of noise from road traffic outside, animals, farm animals making all kinds of noises. So, we transitioned to that where we just audio. And in the last 18 months, it has happened on many occasions where I'm on calls where our chief legal counsel is sitting in his home office and his 4-year-old hops on his lap, right? Or we have colleagues in HR who have babies crawling on their backs while they're, engaged in a Zoom call. So it's amazing how we have shifted and embraced, but also become a little bit more understanding that the traditional work environment is no longer. And we, as long as we're all getting our work done, we're going to have these little monkeys on our backs and dogs barking and delivery trucks ringing the doorbell. So it's been really interesting for me to see that shift as well, because I've lived it for so many years. For some, it's brand new, so they just don't have that point of reference that I think I've recognized in my own experience.
This is a stimulating conversation. We got to get Stephen back involved, but I just had to get up because I was motivated from this conversation to talk about change. But let's just talk about this change here. I don't know if you can see this thing, but this is from a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Plant-based cream cheese.
Alternative. Is it good? Does it taste yummy or?
Yeah, it's really good. No, it's good. See, and so
well, it looks good. But how does it taste?
No, it's really good. It's soft. It's soft, and I'm not pitching this, but when I was a kid, I used to be a TV pitch man. But here we go. This is, it comes without the chive and onions. Like the Philadelphia brand. The store-bought stuff. It's $5. So this in Ralph's here, which is Kroger. It was like $2.97, right? And so I bought my own green onions and chopped them up and mixed it in. All right. And so I actually feel as if like I'm a homesteading, because I'm here all the time. So Stephen, just a little diversion leading back to you.
I don't know how I follow plant-based cream cheese, quite frankly. But what Mirela is saying, though, is something I've been saying for several months now to people, and is simply get your mindset around this. Work is no longer a place where you go. Work is what you do. And it goes back to one of your early questions earlier, Ed, about the guy who says, I'm managing all these empty chairs. Well, he still has the mindset that work is a place. And, Rob's echoed this and Dave has talked a little bit about it. And Mark, of course, agrees with what Mirela is saying. So I think once a leader gets their head around that concept, and as Mirela says, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting your work done. And you're still cooperating, collaborating, you still have innovation. And I think the other thing leaders need to focus on coming out of this is let's focus less on productivity. Productivity is 1960s management, control and command style metric. Let's focus on how well are we innovating? How well are we coming up with creative ideas? How well are we serving our customers? Those are better metrics if people can figure out how to measure those than just simple productivity.
So let's talk about, this is not political, this is just business thinking, but with General Milley here in the US, picking up the phone during a crisis and taking charge. Now it's done all the time, but in the atmosphere that there is now, because of the uncertainty in so many things, it's become a media deal. So here's a guy who's command and control, and he just stepped himself right out of that box and picked up the phone and made direct contact. That's the kind of leadership we need, right?
It is, and leaders who understand that, okay, that's risk taking, and that's personal risk taking. I know people are calling for his resignation now, and other things, and if it had been found out at the time, he might have risked his career at the time. But I think those are the kind of leaders that a non-emotional, a rational, somebody who's responding to a situation, not reacting to it, is the kind of leaders that we need going forward, both in organizations and, more importantly, certainly within government institutions around the world.
Yeah, it's talking about top leadership, Mirela. So Mark Colo has been an executive in relocation, transportation, has recently retired. So just introducing Mark to you, Mirela, a good friend. He's co-founder of a beautiful charity, a 501c3, called FindNeuroHelp.org. You know Larry Linton?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he has Parkinson's. And so I brought Larry together with Mark. Mark has Parkinson's, unfortunately, also, but he co-founded this organization's charity with other people with this affliction, and it's really done well. So Mark, meet Mirela. So because you both know Larry Linton, and he's been on our show with Mark to talk about taking charge of your life, even though you have this affliction. Mark?
Thanks, Ed. That was a mouthful. Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly was.
Compliments. When I'm thinking about leadership, I'm thinking about my industry in particular. I've been in relocation for about 40 plus years, and I focus primarily on the van line side, which is the moving side. And then about 15 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I never thought I'd be a mover and a shaker. But I am. So that's my little joke for you guys. It took a while for you to get that. But it's very much a mom and pop run organization. I mean, movers are owned by agency owners. Some of these owners are very progressive. They think out of the box. They think different ways. They're more comfortable with change, some of these leaders, and others aren't, but one of my first credo in life is the only constant is change. So if you think things aren't going to change, you're wrong. The other one, if you think things can't get worse, you're wrong too, because it can get worse. Life can be a slippery slope at times. So I won't go through my other three, but my point being is I read a book just recently called Think Again. I think the author was Adam Grant. But he talked about how leaders, sometimes they get stuck and riveted in a certain way of thinking, a certain way of acting and reacting, and they don't make the positive changes that people need to make because they're used to doing it one way. And he says there's 4 types of people that make good leaders. He says there's prosecutors, I think there's salespeople, and I can't remember the third one. But the fourth one is scientists, the way they look at things as a scientist would. And scientists will look at other people's work and they'll give it some thought and credence, and they'll think, does that fit here? But they'll give it an opportunity to think about it. Some great leaders don't think about another person's opinion because it's opposite from their own. So I'm very impressed with people who can think in a scientific method, because if they can take all the benefits from all the others in their peers, then they're going to be a better leader overall. So
Rob,
yeah.
Rob, from a coaching point of view, does this hold water?
Absolutely. And I think the problem is kind of even deeper because, who are the followers of all the leaders? I mean, we've had it's a general thing where an army gets in a war and they have to go through the people who have risen to positions of leadership during peacetime to find the ones who can, perform during wartime. I give you Ulysses S. Grant as an example. And we have leaders all around the world and up and down societies for entities whose followers are you got to put some question marks there. I mean, the corporations have fiduciary responsibilities, but you can't really sue them for the social costs of their activities. Our countries, our governments are leading countries where most of the economic power has gone transnational and it's not even paying taxes. And the people, or the employees, are a vast number of people who are last in line in this trip to the future. And so for me, leadership has got to be something about going back and including people I mean, in these structures that are now going into, they're thriving and prospering in a transnational world, and most of the people are not. It's a huge amount of inequality and identities being disrupted. I mean, we're still all, us in the public, we're still all on our national teams, but it's not the same anymore. The world's not the same anymore. So leadership needs to redefine this for everybody and say, well, this is how everybody's going to participate. I'm not sure you can see much of that anywhere.
What I was thinking as you were speaking, Rob, that, I think one of the most difficult things, having been in a leadership role, was recognizing that my leadership style was not working, and it wasn't working with a particular group of employees. And I think that becomes more relevant in today's environment, because in my personal experience, I was distant managing a team in Asia. And it was very challenging because I just was not culturally astute enough to recognize certain cues and why I wasn't getting engagement and participation on conference calls. And it really took some self-reflection to say, whatever, I'm doing that may work in North America and has made me a successful leader, professional for many years. It's clearly I am lacking knowledge and understanding of a lot of cultural etiquette, both in the workplace and outside in a different part of the world. And what I find often is that leaders do get their backs against the wall. They don't do a lot of introspection on whether or not their leadership style needs adjustment, propelled by a changing business, a changing world, or things like now all of a sudden we're all managing remotely. No one's sitting outside of their office. And the world has shifted right before their eyes, and they need to do that very subjective self-evaluation to say, what do I need to learn? How do I do this better? And I think a lot have just said, well, I've been doing this way for so long, it's worked. There just needs to be, first of all, that self-awareness, and then the resources and tools to help managers explore and develop those skills that have been lacking. And I've seen a lot of organizations invest a lot of time, money, and effort in providing training to their leaders, managers and above, which I think has been fantastic. But what was lacking in my experience of any of those leadership courses and training that I was lucky enough to participate in were also the cultural nuances around leadership, whether it's remote or not. Yeah. And
can I dive in there for a second, because you've set something up. I talk a lot about the big picture as if I have answers, but I don't have any answers for the big picture. I'm setting it up as a problem.
Absolutely.
Right? The only answer I have is the one that I put into my global agility training, which says everybody, all of us, have got to be able to speak across a larger range of cultures, fluently, on a daily basis. And then maybe we can start to figure this out, right? How do you get a global team to coalesce, right, behind a company? When the countries identify that that whole country division can come up between the team, or race or gender and all these types of things. How do you get to the cognitive diversity of a team that despite its visible differences, is delving into the fact that there's a lot of perspective being brought to a situation, and then unleashing all that creative power of teams that can see the whole problem. Because we're all like we're in a hotel. We're looking out the keyhole to see what's going on in the hallway, right? And we can only see the part of the hallway through our keyhole, and it's just normal. That's life, right? But there's a fire in the building. We got to do something. So for me, the answer is just basic skill sets about communicating across and building relationships across cultural divides. If we were all a lot better at that, right, the old paradigms that are splitting us up would fall apart, and we would be able to address the problem, which is addressing us just like COVID collectively.
Exactly.
I mean, you're come from any typical larger company today. If you just look at it as the supply chain and then the marketing channels down to the customers, it's multi-continent, multicultural. I mean, there isn't any, American company, right? There aren't any American products, right? So you're inevitably within your own system, and then with the people you're trying to talk to, to buy from and to sell to and all that type of stuff. How many cultural divides are you having to cross? Well, only people who are good at crossing cultural divides are going to be part of a solution to that.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think what also helps is that when organizations make very conscious decision and effort to ensure that there's diversity not only in their employee base but in their leadership base, right?
Absolutely.
Because it adds diversity within and inclusion within even the global mobility program has been something that Mark could probably remember has been a subject that for many years just was not relevant. It never came up in our industry. But over the last 5 or so years, I think it's become a very important topic to even look at the diversity within those employees who, for the most part, as I said, are in management to senior executive levels that are getting opportunities to actually do international assignments abroad, to climatize to the customs and processes in running their businesses in a different geographical location, and taking that back and really coming back a more enriched, stronger and better leader and or manager in their originating country. So, I mean, the idea of building those tools and providing those education and training on the cultural front of things, but also kind of looking at your executive team and saying, well, like Ed said when I first joined, you're a whole bunch of white guys and didn't appear to be any flavor or color or diversity until I showed up, right? It's interesting to see that a lot of organizations are starting to recognize that they're not very diverse in their leaders in terms of the ethnic backgrounds, the cultural experiences, and they're making shifts and adjustments, I think, in the right direction, which could only make everyone a better leader, because there's going to be somebody else across that table who's going to see it with a very different light and a very different perspective, who hopefully is comfortable enough to raise their hand and say, have you thought about it in this way? Because this is how it's hitting me from my life's experience and my viewpoint.
Thank you, Mirela. Mark raised his hand.
Yeah, I think back, it's an old saying, you probably all have heard it, but it kind of goes like, there are those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened. And that's the reality in business, because you have people that they don't try and think differently. They don't try and act differently. And the point of the matter is, when you form a team, it's a hard process. It's not an easy process. You form a team of workers, and you got, some that we've already talked about, all the diversity and the differences people have, but you form the team, and then the team storms, and then it norms, becomes the norm, and then it conforms. So it's kind of like these 4 phases that you go through in building a team, and that's not an easy and simple process. So it takes a lot of work and takes less ego. My third credo in life is the only control is an illusion, right? And as a leader, sometimes you don't want to let go because it's going to reflect on you if they don't act properly. So you can't micromanage your people. You can't control them. You got to liberate them, give them the expectation, give them the right training, but let them make their own way. And I was so used to working throughout my life under a master-servant relationship, right? Well, he's the boss. He owns the company. I can't disagree with him. He'll fire me, and there was a lot of owners out there that were very strict on their employees. But the ones that got a little less controlling, were a little more liberal and gave people opportunities, are the ones that really succeeded. Those are the organizations that did well.
So Stephen, what do you think of Mark's engineering approach?
He's spot on, but I really want to jump back to a thing Mirela said, and it was buried in the middle of what she was saying, but it is so important today. When we talk about diversity, she mentioned cultural experiences, and that is and we joke about, we got 5 white guys here, all Americans, but look, I lived in Asia and worked in Asia for 21 years. I worked and lived in Australia for 12 years. My background, my cultural experience is very different than Mark's or Dave. And I know Rob's lived in the Middle East for a time, which makes his experience different from mine as well. So when we look at diversity, it's not just gender, it's just not sexual orientation, it's just not the color of your skin or anything else, or which university you went to, because there's some companies that don't even diversify in that area, but there's also just the diversity of experiences. And I think that's, again, something that people have to take in consideration going forward, without a doubt.
Yeah. So, Dave Levine, this has been an interesting conversation. I had no idea when when I recruited you to be a co-sponsor and speaker here. I had no idea what we were going to talk about, frankly. So here we are.
And that's what I love about your invitations. They're like, we're just going to talk about stuff.
Well, we have a framework,
like,
and I'll always bring some food, so we talk about food.
Next time, please share. It's lunchtime for me, or past lunchtime.
Dave, what do you think about new healthcare policies as a result of managers becoming more human?
It's positive. I mean, we're all talking about whether it's healthcare policies or just our own roles, and as we're challenged to become more leaders in our own spheres, our own organizations or nonprofits, it goes back to some basic skills. I have been relatively successful in customer management and sales in large, with Aetna and Optum, United Health, and large healthcare organizations, but I certainly never aspired to do that. I never aspired to become good at sales. I didn't see it as my career path. I didn't aspire to that. But I trained in social work, good listening skills, good relationship building, not going for change until you were engaged with your audience, and whether that audience is a couple across from you in a therapy session or a benefits manager who you would like to buy a particular benefit. You don't introduce that change into your audience until you're comfortable and you've developed credibility, and all that goes into successful sales. But it didn't come from aspiring to be good at sales. It came from paying attention in social work school and paying attention to individual clients across from me for those years they did clinical work. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here. The preparation to be leaders isn't necessarily aspiring to think I want to be a leader. It's paying attention to those basic human interactional skills that can lead to better health policies, or again, whatever spheres we're working in, for us to be more effective in those spheres.
Dave Levine, what's your website?
globalcareexperts.com.
Okay, great. Thank you for sponsoring. So, Stephen Howard, Rob, just a sec. How would you characterize this? I'm asking this as the producer of the show, but as we get to the next phase, which will be the on-demand access of this program, what I'm thinking about is concepts about how to promote the darn thing. What do we call this?
This is, you're talking about voices for change. I love that title that you have, the brand around that title, and all of us are talking about what needs to change and what leaders and others need to think about in terms of change. As Mark says, change is a constant. If you don't believe things are changing, you're crazy. And even when we come out of this, I know we always focus lately on coming out of the pandemic, but there's other things we should be considering too. Just the impact of IT. Artificial intelligence, the growth of artificial intelligence has nothing to do with the pandemic. The decline in tourism may or may not have something to do with the pandemic. Rob's mentioned environmental the concerns about the environment. That has nothing to do with the pandemic. So really, it's just think about the future of the world. And I know a lot of people focus on the future of work, and I know there's a reason for that, but we need a focus on the future of the world. One of my biggest concerns is coming out of the pandemic, but before the pandemic, Alzheimer's, dementia, and a stroke were projected to increase by 67% in the United States between 2020 and 2030. And that at 2030, we would have 10 million Americans and about, if I recall correctly, 76 million people around the world suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, and stroke. Now, this is pre-pandemic projections. Obviously, all the stress people are going through, all the impact on our brains, the anxiety, the concerns about unemployment, about financial security, the binge eating that's going on during the pandemic, the binge drinking that's going on, the domestic abuse that's been going on. I can guarantee you those numbers are going to be higher than projected. And no one's talking about that. Our leaders are not talking about that. I realize the government has to focus right now on let's get the economies back. Let's rebuild our economies. Who's talking about rebuilding our societies? I don't know.
I think a lot of people in self-development, in healthcare, probably kind of not the mainstream healthcare, not your general, GP or the hospital surgeon. They're talking about these issues. Good. And they're really important and really relevant. And, one that's important to me is around mental health. And Dave was talking a little bit about it, and I'm really curious because I find that in some parts of the world, accessing, even if it's available through your employer's medical plan, any kind of hotline or support around well-being, addressing things like domestic violence, depression, burnout, it was not well utilized in certain parts of the world, where from a cultural perspective, it was deemed to be a sign of personal weakness. I think there was a lot of fear that my employee can get access to the fact that I've called in the employee assistance program to express some concerns around managing life and work. And I'm really curious if you have seen a shift and a transition away from those concepts, particularly for individuals in certain parts of the world. And I'm definitely not picking on Asia, but I know that in many Asian benefits plan, this was, it's been a relatively new thing to put in the employee assistance programs and access and availability of those types of resources. The utilization rates, which is what in the past I've had access to, significantly differed by geography from one region of the world to another. So I'm really curious as to whether or not you have seen a mind shift around the whole topic of well-being and mental health, and whether or not individuals are feeling more comfortable, having gone through what we all have gone through globally in the last 18 months, to reach out to those resources and utilize them, because obviously employers see the necessity and are making them available to everyone, irrelevant of whether they're sitting in Latin America or they're sitting in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Dave, yeah.
Yeah, it's helping as in a similar way as it's helping in the US, but it remains that access to behavioral health resources in most parts of the world, in non-English speaking countries, Canada, the US, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, is paltry. The number of providers per population, per individual, is the access, because there's few behavioral health providers, is really sparse. And the stigma, which you're also pointing out, Mirela, is enormous. And so there has been some shift, as there's been in the US, because stigma for behavioral health issues in North America hasn't gone away either. But COVID has helped put depression and anxiety in particular on the front burner. And to an extent, it has helped puncture through some of that stigma outside the US. However, it remains that there are fewer behavioral health providers generally, and there is no reimbursement in the health plans again, outside of North America, Argentina, Brazil, a few other exceptions, but generally there is no care or reimbursement for that care. And there's no care because there's no reimbursement in health plans. So the EAP becomes the behavioral health benefit in a lot of companies outside that multinationals. So they're seeing a lot more severe cases than your worried well of the workplace EAP in North America, because there's no access to behavioral health otherwise. So you're seeing a lot more severe cases, and to the extent EAPs aren't geared for medications or eating disorders or psychotic disorders, it's been a real challenge. So as I think before you came out, I mentioned EAPs in the States through EAPA reporting that a professional association has increased from 30 to 100% through their membership participation in EAPs. But that 30 to 100% is still on a base of average EAP utilization in the US being around 5 to 6%, and outside the US being 1 or 2%. And I think that's part of what you're pointing out. Technology has been an equalizer, and you have all mentioned that to an extent, but it has an EAP where in-person counseling has gone away for the last year and a half and has forced there were providers like Lyra, Spring Health, Ginger, Modern Health, and others that have developed confidential platforms through which to deliver telehealth counseling. But still, they were in a big minority 3 years ago. But because of venture capital interest and the shift towards there's no other means to receive mental health services other than telehealth, those companies have thrived, and it has forced more traditional players like ComPsych or Optum or Morneau, now branded LifeWorks out of Canada, to leverage their technology, their own platforms, to extend telehealth in ways that were reaching only a handful of people, only less than 10% of people, of participants through telehealth. And now it's nearly 100% because of the safety concerns with in-person counseling.
So I have to jump before we go to Rob. I have to jump back to 2 years ago. There was a guy, an Israeli guy, came up to me and says, "Hey, listen, we want to advertise with you and we want to be on your programs." This was before Zoom, live programs. Well, and so it was betterhelp.com.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, they've had like 1 million counseling sessions or even more. And it's so they threw some money at me because they wanted the PR and connections. And so it worked, and it's still going on. So they're
now throwing their money. BetterHelp is now throwing their money at Adriana Grande, and I mean they're at that level to get testimonials and spokespeople on a level that mental health hasn't experienced before. But they are. You're right. They're providing millions. What's the Matan? Matan, I think, is the name of the founder.
Yeah, right. He spoke at my Houston meeting, and then he had me come up to Cupertino and work in the Plug and Play Center. So anyway,
another good example of how technology has been leveraged for the changing times.
Yeah, Rob Pianka. I'm sorry it took so long to get back to you.
Quite all right. It's fascinating. It's just really fascinating to listen to, and I feel like I always have to talk about a big picture first before I come back to, picking up on the points that have been made. And, my experience in all these matters is based on humanitarian assistance in conflict zones and in post-Soviet depression in the 90s and Yugoslavia. And we had a lot of programs that required in the end one-on-one therapies with individuals, but because of the mass of individuals requiring it, or the collective nature of the victimization, mass rape, for instance, you ended up in a situation where if you wanted to deliver personal health assistance to somebody, it had to be in a broader context of a more public, a social debate or discussion about stuff. And to not get too grim about it, but I was watching the Soviet Union at a time when they, because their command economy collapsed and they all had to shift to something which wasn't there, right, yet, right? And a lot of people couldn't make that shift, and it took generations of people to make that shift. There was what's called a die-off, where the population actually declines by like 10%. And you could say that it was because of the excessive drinking of vodka, but it was vodka that was made in a bathtub, and it was vodka that was sold with ingredients in it that were killing people. And it was just a mass disaster for a number of years. Flash forward over to US Midwest industrial towns and the opioid epidemic, which I have not heard it described as something in the context of a die-off, but for me, it looks like one. Then COVID shows up, and so we have all these other deaths going on.
So this is like a mass suicide, like a Guinea.
You can't afford to have people. Yeah. You can't afford to have the same number of people anymore because the economic structure for that has gone away, right? So the population has to decline. You always find reasons why it declined, in the autopsies, right? But it's structural to a certain extent. You have a thing going on here.
Time to go. Huh?
Yeah. If we're going to take the world population and move them into this, post-industrial, post-agricultural, service-oriented digital future, which could be quite prosperous, right? They're going to have some sort of reconciliation between people's expectations and pride and what they're going to get from work, right? If you were raised to be a provider of a family and you had to work in McDonald's and your wife had to work there too, and you couldn't afford healthcare, that got depressing, right? If you were raised to be in a Soviet society and it disappeared, and you didn't even know what work was or how to trade or buy or sell, anything like that, that got depressing. If our answer is going to be different as to how people are going to work and what companies are going to offer and what livelihood means and what pay means and all that type of stuff, and all those questions are open right now. You could just read the news. It's all up for grabs. We're going to have to somehow reconcile what people expect out of work, how that incorporates with their pride, right? And if we were even just talking about that, then it would be you would provide an atmosphere for people not to think that it's their personal failure all the time and to be ashamed of seeking help, right? We tend to personalize these things, particularly in our country, and it's not personal, not always, right? There is a general, structural thing going on that puts the pot on the oven, on the fire, right? People handle it differently. Some people are, behave well and responsible and all that type of stuff. Others are not. But in general, if you're looking at it from a public health point of view, which deals with populations and not individuals, you do have a kind of disconnect between the desire to help people and the public discussion that help is being delivered in.
Stephen, what do you think of that?
My mind's spinning. Thanks, Rob. And I've run out of coffee as well. So
USAID you could read this in USAID discussions.
Again, I think he's raising issues, and it goes back. And I like, Mirela, I understand some people are increasing their EAPs and what have you for the workforce, but my comment was more about government and Congress and in the United States anyway, Congress funding programs of this nature going forward. And like I said, right now the focus is on getting the economy back to wellness. My longer term concern, quite honestly, is how are we going to get our population back to wellness, particularly mental wellness from a government perspective. So, and that's, again, I think we mentioned this before you came on, and you're in Canada, so you might be interested in this. We have a global workplace wellness summit on November 8th to 10th. It's going to be virtual. It's led by a lady out of Manitoba. And I think Winnipeg, I guess. But anyway, it's a global summit on workplace wellness for 3 days. And I'm leading the leadership, well-being, and engagement committee that we're going to do a presentation at it. So these are the issues that I'm glad to see that people are talking about, and that some companies have already taken steps forward on it. But I think our governments need to also.
I couldn't agree with you more, Stephen. I think healthcare workers are talking about it. Wellness coaches are talking about it. Regular people are talking about it with themselves and looking in the mirror and saying, why did I just gain 25 pounds baking bread for the last 18 months? But you're right, our governments aren't. And because I have vested interest in the US government, working for a US company, but sit here in Canada, I get to see it on both sides of the border. And although they talk a lot about the impact of the pandemic, whether it be the isolation, and we were briefly talking about kind of the alarming increase in dementia and other kinds of diagnoses that have a lot to do with cognitive behavior, cognitive interaction, with contact, with access to physical fitness, to wellness programs, to music programs in nursing homes and senior centers around the country. Those have come to a complete halt for almost a better part of the last 18 months in Canada. So, our kids have not have access to, baseball leagues, to soccer, and many of them have kind of developed in those really critical, 2 to almost 4 years, wearing a mask, hiding behind, not getting close to people. I'm sure many of us have stories of friends who have parents who are in nursing homes or senior assisted centers that were thriving, doing really well. And the fact that access to visitation was suspended for a better part of the last year and a half, and now have been reinstated, the family members are seeing a significant decline in the mental and physical health of those individuals. Yeah. And although our politicians kind of allude to it and they mention it, I don't see any real investment in addressing those issues.
So Mirela, you just mentioned the word cognitive. We've been hearing that a lot lately. So to you, what does that mean? Does that mean conceptual alignment, conceptual understanding, rather than the specifics, more of a broad picture and bringing things together instantaneously? Is that the scope of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's how I interpret that for myself too, right? Where I find that it's kind of like, take an individual who's been in ICU for 6 months, right? Battling whatever illness they may have had, right? They lose that ability to critically think, to do basic things, basic arithmetic, matching shapes, colors. And that's just because of that lack of interaction. And I think all of us are struggling that we have been so just focused on certain things for the last 18 months and have really been isolated and have not had the means and access to all of those things that keep not just our minds sharp, but also our physical bodies sharp. Personally for me, I love dance. And I used to dance 10 to 12 hours. I do Latin dancing and other kinds of couple dancing I read a really interesting article how dance is so amazing in helping people who are on the onset of MS and a lot of physical disabilities, that really forcing the brain to learn and to send signals to the body and to muscles to move in a certain way, really slow down the progression. And when we take that away from, billions of people around the world who may already kind of be on a trajectory towards some mental decline because of onset of different diseases, or physical decline because of diagnosis, I think it's just accelerated those issues for millions of people around the world.
It's interesting. Mark and I did a broadcast some months ago, and then I had a guy, concert pianist, who showed a video, a clip about how music how music was interjected into the training of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's people, older people, and they immediately picked up on either the remembrance of the tune or whatever, and they started dancing. Whereas 5 minutes previous, they were like, in a chair and couldn't get up. Mark, do you recall that?
Yeah, I do. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of truth in that, Ed. I mean, it's interesting how that impacts the mind. With Parkinson's, since I've got a vested interest in that disease, cycling is supposed to be a good thing.
Right.
Because you create a cadence and a rhythm.
Right. That's what Larry Linton is doing.
Mind is steady, right? Another one is boxing, right?
Oh, wow.
Give you an example there. That helps your coordination, your focus. It gets your blood going a little bit when you get into a good punching routine. There's all kinds of things that will help these diseases. But statistically, I wanted to leave one thing with the group because you might not have heard it, but there's probably twice as many Alzheimer's patients out there as there are Parkinson's patients. Usually the people that are in the greatest number get the greatest attention and the greatest research. So I'm kind of in the back seat to a certain extent because of the condition I have.
So what about ALS? You started talking about
that. Yeah, I couldn't even give you a statistic on that. But all the diseases,
now that's the Lou Gehrig's, nerves, right?
Yeah, that's the one Stephen Hawking had. But when you get ALS, typically, it goes for you have about five or six more years to live. Most people, when they get ALS. Stephen Hawking lived, I think, 30 years or more with ALS. So we all know he was a unique person. But in the next 10 years, Parkinson's, the burden of debt on the economy through Parkinson's is going to double. And that's just Parkinson's. And you got all the other chronic illnesses that are going to do the same thing practically. So it's going to become more and more a major issue as time goes on. So, but I just want to get some of the stats out to you guys and let you know that. So,
Stephen, you see a book coming out of all this?
Well, I wrote the book, Better Decisions, Better Thinking, Better Outcomes, partially about this, but I looked at it from how stress and brain illnesses impact our decision making, both on a professional basis and a personal basis. But I'll share a statistic with you that'll freak out all of the five of us men on this thing. Thank you, Ed. I love that. Nice. Great book cover. Thank you very much. Nice. But Alzheimer's and dementia, more and more we're learning, yes, there is a genetic component to it. And some of it is, there's a segment of it that is genetically defined, but a lot of it is lifestyle. And for instance, for us five guys out here, men who pack on the most abdominal fat in their 40s have the highest risk for dementia in their 60s and 70s. And so, that's one of my messages I keep trying to tell people. It's what you do to your bodies in your 30s and 40s is going to impact your risk, not necessarily getting it, but increases your risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, and stroke in your 60s and 70s. Go ahead, Mark. I'll yield the floor. I'll yield the floor for the gentleman from Orange County.
There's another book. It's a great book, and it supports Steve's comment he just shared. It's called The Brain Maker. And it talks about how stuff that you have in the gut, the microbacterial, whatever, it can break through the lining of the stomach, gets in the blood system, and it goes to the brain. It inflames the brain cells that are in the brain. And
wow.
I just read yesterday, Mark, an article on its early research, but the amyloid, whatever it's called, the amyloid beta. Thank you. No, the stuff that goes in the brain, the excess protein in the brain. Some scientists have just, using mice, have figured out that the liver may be the producer of these excess proteins that get into our blood and then hits the brain. So yes, the gut, but maybe even the liver. Again, and what do we do to our livers? Well, we destroy our livers with fatty foods and alcohol and everything else. So, but again, it's more and more being seen that there's a huge lifestyle component to this. And that, again, and stress. And that goes back to my earlier comment. I mean, our increased stress and prolonged stress that we've gone through for the last 18 months as a globe, as a world population, just tells me that these incidences are going to increase, in the next 10 to 15 years, because it's what's happening to our bodies.
Okay, so yes, go ahead, Mirela.
No, I was just going to say, in the first 30 minutes, did I miss any commentary?
I don't remember anything before you arrived.
Oh, that's why I like joining you.
And there's the first example of early Alzheimer's.
You know, my
and this is water.
You know, has anyone really talked about the impact of the media messaging that we've been bombarded with, and the fear mongering that's been going on in the last 18 months, and the correlation between that and our heightened level of stress? Because I mean, you know, prior to the pandemic, we've all lived fairly stressful lives. I don't know anyone who, you know, for the most part, who didn't feel the stress, some better than others at implementing techniques to manage that, whether it be through meditation, mindfulness, physical exercise, you know, therapeutic help, et cetera, et cetera. But I found a very interesting difference in the saturation of bad news and things that could trigger a stress response in the body from country to country. So, you know, recently I was in Philadelphia visiting my son at university, and I really have to say that it was a little bit more toned down in terms of that, the numbers and the statistics and how bad it is, and you know, how we need to run and hide because we're all going to die. I didn't get that same sense of overwhelming pressure that would create a physiological reaction in my own body. I see more of that on the Canadian news channels, and I don't know if Ed, you tune into that with any regularity. I'm just wondering if anybody's even thought or looked at that, because I have had friends who've actually bitten the bullet and said, I'm going to Europe, you know, to this country or that country. And they've come back to say that there's less of this noise constantly in our ears, and people seem a little bit more relaxed, seem to have gotten back to some sense of normal, enjoying life, hugging, kissing, embracing each other on the street, more so than we're experiencing here in North America.
I have to tell you, sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Mirela, I have to tell you, in one of the comments, and it was almost a flippant comment put in my book, was that one of the best ways to reduce stress is to stop watching cable news TV of any kind, because everything is breaking news. It doesn't matter what side. And I tell you what, I stopped watching cable news about 7 years ago, and my blood pressure numbers dropped almost within 2 months and have stayed low. But yeah, that kind of that media influence on our stress and anxiety is documented. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
But it all kinds of ties together. Both the positive side of the things that we now can understand because they've taken MRIs of brains doing economic decisions. So now we're shifting rational economics towards one that's actually accurate, because we understand people make decisions by emotions because the different part of the brain is going off. The technology that's helping us have this truly revolutionary wave of self-understanding, right? Which a lot of us have been employing insights from to move forward, is the same technology that has perfected the ability to mind control entire populations into a state of anger and keep them there and divide them. And this technology is driving, now it's driving globalization. Before it was like the steam engine got a hold of it, but ever since the computers made it possible to do just-in-time inventory globally, right? Digital and economic has been, you know, united in this massive thing, and you have conglomerates of media empires that localize vicious things. You know, if you go from country to country, it's the same media empire saying different things on different sides of arguments. We're living in this world where I'm not sure if we as individuals are prepared to deal with the kind of weapons that are being used, tools and weapons that are out there now. It's a massive amount of change. I like to be optimistic and say that we've made major breakthroughs in this at the end of the last century to really create a world that's more controllable and that allow us to express ourselves humanly and humanely within a larger context. I like to think that because I'm an optimistic person, but you look at some of the uses that are going on with this new knowledge we have, to use it to manipulate and to divide and to conquer and to hold people in dictatorships. It's brutal. I mean, the internet is a question mark as to whether or not it's going to end up in being the greatest liberator of mankind or the greatest source of imprisonment. It's tough. We're living in tough times.
You're an optimist.
And
I'm an optimist.
And Ed, our 2 hours are almost up, but I think we're just getting started.
Exactly.
Part 2 of this.
So I remember when Joanna and I were able to spend last December in Maui, and not only is the time difference weird, but you can't find what you will usually watch. And I used to just always tune in CNN, and I happen to like MSNBC and that combination. So I found it hard to watch it. And then I started watching, I finally found it, on a Honolulu station. And then I said, yuck, it's interrupting my aloha feeling, and, then I come back here to San Diego, which isn't a bad place, but man, you're right, it plugged in all the time and you can't get away. So I get it, exactly. So Dave, Levine, thank you for co-sponsoring this and being the voice of EAP and that kind of thing here.
Well, let me try to interject a little bit more optimism than I gleaned from Rob's last comments, but I'm sure we could get there, Rob, if we explored that a little further. But we've focused on telehealth and this lack of access globally for behavioral health providers, and how COVID has accelerated recognition of behavioral health issues around the globe, and accelerated the migration to telehealth solutions. But there's other resources and technology that are promising to continue to cut through the stigma and help us access behavioral health. One of them is, incidentally, it was Alain Matas. Now I said Matan with BetterHelp. It was Alain Matas, the founder and president of that. So Lyra Health, BetterHelp, Modern Health, Spring, Lyra, Ginger, great telehealth providers, but there's other tools and technology, and many of which are self-help, where people can take privately, confidentially, take health assessments and evaluate different aspects of their health, and based on those results can be steered to resources that fit those fit the results of the assessment. I don't know if FindNeuroHelp.org is set up for questionnaires and to leverage technology to guide folks to the right resources based on those self-assessments, but it could be an example where that is used. Mark, does FindNeuroHelp utilize questionnaires or surveys?
Not at this point, just on the events we have, but we've talked about growing that. Yeah. I'd love to get you on an offline phone call to talk to you about your thoughts. And
but that's just one area. I'd happy to, Mark, but that's just one area. Wellness Checkpoint, speaking of Manitoba, Steve, and I'm curious about the organizers there. There's a Manitoba-based organization, Infotech, that has been a pioneer in health assessments and Wellness Checkpoint. They were recently bought by another Canadian organization based in Montreal, Carebook. And they're putting together solutions and leveraging platforms and technology exactly in this way to more, and other organizations are doing it as well. But I'm most familiar with Wellness Checkpoint because it's offered in 26 languages. So a multinational can ask the same question in Japan, in China, in Belgium, and in Canada, and get comparable validated responses. So you can compare risks around the globe in their multinational populations. But that's just one area of technology, and AI is another one where I haven't gotten completely on board with chat bots, but there's some fascinating technology going on with responses, at least initial responses, to engage people before they're handed off to an in-person counselor.
Yeah.
So lots of movement in that area that might help increase access to behavioral health care.
So may I please interject before we all leave? Mark and Dave, use the chat thing down below and send each other email, okay? So you can connect later at will. I thank you guys for educating me. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having us. I did not know what to expect. This was an amazing discussion, and I look forward to connecting with all of you again offline.
Thank you. So October 1 is going to be a very special program. It's called Beat VUCA. And everybody's coming on to talk about how they can beat the atmosphere of VUCA. And it's a very interesting group coming. So you'll all get notified. And thank you, Stephen, again.
My last comment is lower your blood pressure, turn off cable news, and turn on the global TV talk show.
In fact, I got a haircut yesterday down the street with this gal who does Hollywood people. I mean, she does her head. And so she was telling me that I ought to start a program for musicians who want to show off their record or their songs before they have to deal with record labels. And she says that I think would be, this is just a haircut, cut. And so she was talking and about all this, the goodwill and the peacefulness of having that kind of a talk show, because she knows my reach in the audience reach. She says, think of a channel. I'll connect you with some people who are budding musicians if you want. So, just another vehicle for perhaps relaxation.
Awesome. So I'll do the dancing while everybody else does the singing. Is that how it's going to work?
Well, frankly, I'm not a voyeur, but I'd like to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I think I better end this. Okay.
Take care. Bye,
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.